Hey folks, this is video number 9 in my series of 10 videos for my coaching program. This one is about hormones. Obviously, hormone balance is a very important aspect of your well-being and good health, so hopefully you will enjoy this video and I'll see you again soon. Then let's get into hormones. We know that keeping our hormones in balance is very important for our well-being. Keeping them all balanced and working together, creating a state of homeostasis, is our best shot at having a long, healthy life. So there are about 20,000 genes in our body. Now, not all genes are turned on all the time. In fact, only a few of them are. We have genes that control things like our liver and our lungs and our heart and things of that nature, and only the genes that are relative to the activities of those particular organs are typically turned on. These hormones, for the most part, are affected by lifestyle choices. That may be from an environmental point of view, but more often from the point of view of the food that we ingest, which has a major impact on starting up the hormone delivery process within the body. So hormones are basically secreted by various organs within the body. For example, we have the liver, which secretes insulin. We've talked about insulin quite a lot during the course of these videos and how it can do some good things for you and it can do some bad things for you. So it's definitely the organs that take care of the production of these hormones. So hormones are basically chemical messengers. They flow through the bloodstream and they're on their way to other cells within the body, and those cells have receptors on them, and those receptors are able to accept those hormones, of course, unless they are resistant in some way. We've talked about leptin resistance, we've talked about insulin resistance, and in those situations, of course, the cells, the receiving cells, if you were, the receptors are not receiving the hormone, and of course that causes all sorts of problems as well. So when we eat, there is immediately a whole bunch of hormone responses, and the objective of all these hormones is to keep our body in a state of homeostasis. But if we're not eating the right things and our lifestyle choices are not optimal, then it's quite possible that all these hormones will get out of whack. So then we're going to lose the homeostasis state and we're not going to feel right, or perhaps even end up being sick. So my Be Lean for Life protocol impacts about 10 of these major hormones. Well, actually it impacts a whole lot more than that, but 10 of them I would consider to be important enough to put into this video so we can understand how they all work together. So these hormones affect our health, obviously, they longevity, the disease, or at least disease protection, mood swings, stress issues, sleep issues, energy, pleasure, sex life, body composition, pretty much everything that we worry about on a daily basis, these hormones affect them. So obviously working together, working effectively and keeping the body in a state of homeostasis is the optimal state to be in, and of course that's what we strive to do. And certainly within my protocol, one of the major objectives is to keep all these hormones in balance and help you have a long, healthy life. So let's talk about insulin first of all. We've talked about insulin before, the hormone that's secreted by the liver, and typically it's in response to ingestion of food, more specifically carbohydrates, where protein does give you a little bit of a insulin spike. Fats really don't, but it's the carbohydrates that really cause all the problems associated with spikes of insulin and associated insulin resistance. So insulin supports the macronutrient transportation throughout the body to receiving cells. It also controls the metabolic shift between being a carb burner and a fat burner. Most people these days, certainly eating the standard American diet, are primarily carbohydrate burners. And part of my program is to have you convert over from being a carbohydrate stroke sugar burner to a fat burner or a ketone burner. So elevated insulin within the bloodstream eventually causes insulin resistance, and as I said before, the receptors on cells that would be looking to receive various nutrients can't do so because they are resistant to the insulin carrier. Now, leptin, also a very important hormone when it comes to appetite and eating and signals associated with that. The brain can become leptin resistant as well. So there's no good news associated with insulin spikes. It causes all sorts of problems within the body, and of course too much insulin in the bloodstream and associated sugar means you could be in a state of pre-diabetes or even type 2 diabetes. So insulin is an absolutely critical hormone in the body, and it's absolutely critical that we learn how to control it effectively so it doesn't have any negative impacts, and we can only utilize the positive side of that hormone. So leptin, that's also another really important hormone. It lets the brain know how much fat we've got on board. So if we have quite a big fat store, and of course that's assuming that it's actually accessible, and we know that the fat store is not accessible when we've got too much insulin in the system, but under normal circumstances the fat cells would send messages to the brain through this hormone leptin to say we have enough fat on board, so we don't need to go out and eat anymore necessarily. We certainly have the option to burn the fat for energy, and so it doesn't start to trigger off all the hunger hormones. It also regulates the energy in, energy out ratio, if you will, and it interacts with the ghrelin hormone, which is the hunger/appetite hormone. So basically, when your body decides through hormone response, etc., that you are deficient in energy, it sends a message to the brain to say it's time to eat some more. Now, of course, if you are a carbohydrate burner, then the message that gets through is you need some more carbs. Of course, if you are not a carb burner, or indeed a fat burner, then there's a lot more options. You can, of course, eat more food, that's perfectly reasonable, but at the same time you can still utilize your body fat as well. So the cycle of eating more and more carbs and storing more and more fat can be broken as soon as you get into a fat burning mode. Glucagon is another hormone that's very important. Glucagon basically controls the demand for releasing energy internally within the body. The primary sources for this are the fat stores, of course, but also from the muscle tissue and from the liver. So ideally, if you're in a good homeostasis state, you will be using up the energy that is stored in your liver and in your fat cells. Of course, if you are on a calorie restrictive diet and those particular sources are turned off to you for reasons we've mentioned before, then if you don't eat or tend to maintain a calorie restriction, then the body will start to utilize muscle tissue for protein, and of course we don't want that. So glucagon is a very important hormone, and it really controls the energy requirements of the body. Now then, cortisol. This is again another very important hormone. It's produced by the adrenal glands, and its primary purpose is to respond to or recover from fight or flight responses that you put yourself into one way or another. These would be such things as low blood sugar, physical or psychosocial, prolonged exercising, and deprivation of sleep and so on. All of these things will end up bringing cortisol into the picture. And if you have chronic cortisol problems, then this will cause leptin resistance as well. So objectively, you really don't want to have a whole lot of cortisol flowing around your body, certainly during the day when you are going about your normal business. Now then, there are certain times of the day when cortisol actually becomes a very positive component of the hormone breakdown. Cortisol has its own circadian rhythm. The idea of the rhythm of cortisol, that is the circadian rhythm, is that in the later hours of the day, when you're getting ready to go to bed, you would be reducing the amount of cortisol in your body so that you can start to prepare for a good night's sleep. You don't want to be wired up when you go to bed, so cortisol starts to slow down during that part of the day. Now in the morning when you wake up, it's a signal to the body to produce cortisol, which takes your body through the waking up process. It basically gets you ready and stoked for the day. So it's important that your cortisol rhythm is in sync with your personal circadian rhythms, because if they're out of whack, then you're never going to be feeling perhaps the right way, wired at the wrong time or tired at the wrong time. So it's really important to keep these two rhythms in sync. One way to do that, of course, during the evening prior to going to bed, turn off the TV, any computer screens and things of that type. That will help your cortisol levels to recognize that it's time to shut down, and they'll start slowing up. If you go to bed tired and wired, there's a pretty good chance that you won't get good restorative sleep. And as we've mentioned before, the restorative sleep is going to help our memory, put things in the right slots, and all the things that happen during the day will be stored appropriately so we can recall them when we need to. And of course, any physical activity that we've participated in, then the body starts to repair muscles and tendons and things of that nature. So it's really important to get that good night's sleep, and too much cortisol in the system will definitely affect that. So now let's go on to the next hormone. This one is melatonin. Now melatonin is a very important hormone for sleeping. The way it works is that about an hour or so before you go to sleep, assuming that you've done what I said in the previous section on cortisol, is you've turned off the lights or the bright light, maybe wearing blue light restrictive glasses, and turning off your phone and things of that nature, so that your melatonin can start to flow and get you prepared for a night of restorative sleep. Obviously the melatonin and the cortisol work together as a kind of tag team. One should be operative while the other's not, and vice versa. So as long as they are in sync and the appropriate flows are going on throughout the body at the correct time, then you're in a position where you can be wide awake and good to go during the day, and you can be ready to sleep at night. If those things are out of whack, well, you know what, you're always feeling in the wrong state at the wrong time. Okay, let's talk about the sex hormones next. The two primary ones we'll be talking about here are testosterone and estrogen. These particular hormones, again, are dietary controlled, actually, as well as exercise. So again, lifestyle has a big impact on the sex hormones that are traveling around your system. Men typically have more testosterone in their body than estrogen, and women the opposite. Of course, if these tend to get out of sync, and men have got too much estrogen, or women have too much testosterone, then things start to go astray, and so we need to make sure that we can control these best as we can. So moderate resistance exercise and intermittent fasting certainly both increase testosterone and human growth hormone. So this protects our muscles, so that if we are fasting, our body recognizes that we're fasting rather than starving, and as a result the necessary hormones kick in to preserve our muscles. Just to give an example of how the food can affect the hormones, soy products for the most part, which are GMO, which of course is bad news in the first place, but soy products are typically what we call estranogenic, which means they have a lot of estrogen in them. So for men, if they're eating too much soy, then there's a possibility they can end up with man boobs, which isn't terribly attractive, or at least not to me. And if women have too much estrogen in their body, there are certain types of cancers that can be triggered by high estrogen. So it's really important to keep these sex hormones under control. Let's go on to dopamine. Okay, dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it's released by the neurons in your system. And it's basically a pathway in the body that leads to motivation and reward. So let me give you an example here. Let's say that your body is sending messages to your brain that you're hungry. So let's assume you're a carb burner, you can't get to your fat, and the body's saying, I need some more food. So it will make you feel hungry through the leptin and ghrelin hormones, and then you'll go out and you'll eat a bunch of carbs, and your body will reward you. It will reward you by making you feel happy that you've actually got these carbs, and you've got the body happy from the point of view it has energy. The bad news, of course, is, as we've mentioned many times, that all this extra carbohydrates in the system is spiking the insulin, increasing fat stores, causing diabetes and all sorts of metabolic diseases. So while dopamine is good from a point of view of being a rewarding type hormone, the problem is if you're doing the wrong things and you're getting rewarded for doing the wrong things, like eating loads of carbohydrates or sugar or whatever lifestyle things that you choose to do, then you are going to end up basically having your body reward you for things that actually are not very good for you at all. Of course, at this point, usually the willpower is not operating very effectively because, as I've mentioned before, that inflammation of the brain affects your ability to control your willpower. So at this point, again, you are typically in a vicious circle and it's very difficult to get out of it. And of course, it has a lot of bad negative health outcomes. Let's go on to epinephrine, often referred to as adrenaline. Adrenaline combines with cortisol and dopamine, create a fairly interesting combo, if you will. And if they are all correctly balanced, you feel good. You have an overwhelming feeling of well-being, which is obviously an objective. So when the epinephrine is working well with the cortisol and dopamine, you typically feel pretty good. On the other hand, if you have too much adrenaline coursing through your veins, then there's going to be some negative effects for that as well. It's kind of like having too much cortisol. It's going to make you feel wired all the time. Of course, that is stress-inducing. And it's also going to raise your resting heart rate, increase your blood pressure, increase sugar metabolism. It's basically another one of those hormones where the right amount is fantastic, is perfect, if you will, but too much definitely has a negative effect on you. So in summary then, having well-balanced hormones is a pretty complicated subject. It does definitely affect the quality of your life. It affects the length of your life. So it's really important that getting this hormone mix, or living in a state of homeostasis, is very important for your long-term health. So as long as you eat well, exercise well, have plenty of good restorative sleep, try to avoid as much stress as possible, then the odds are pretty good that you will remain in this optimal state for the rest of your life. So if your hormones are all out of whack, there's a pretty good chance that later in life you may have some uncomfortable or even life-threatening events associated with the imbalance of hormones throughout your system. So the good news is that my Be Lean for Life protocol covers all of these topics we've discussed in these videos so far, and it's in a well-structured, easy to follow way. So I would encourage you to get on board and look forward to a much longer, healthier life.